Discover over 100 episodes of Bartholomewtown on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is the Bartholomewtown Podcast.
You know, a big part of my job is trying to mentor and inspire that next generation. So, you know, I'm often exposed to those folks. You know, I've taught classes at University of Rhode Island. I do lectures everywhere and as many as I can, as much as I can.
Welcome in to another edition of the Bartholomewtown Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Bartholomew. On today's episode, a look at conservation efforts here in Rhode Island with a conservation director at Roger Williams Park Zoo, Lou Perrotti. Great to be back with each and every one of you from the Bartholomewtown Podcast studios here in Providence, Rhode Island. I was out of the country for a couple of weeks down in Brazil, although I did manage to get each episode posted right before I left, so you shouldn't have had too much of a disruption to your podcast consumption schedule. And we were off last week, the week after Labor Day, giving you the opportunity to catch up on some of the older episodes you may have missed, something I do from time to time. Not right now, though. There are plenty of episodes heading your way every Tuesday and Friday, new episodes, and I'm pretty excited about some of the tapings that are scheduled or in some cases have even already happened. Fascinating conversation on today's episode with Roger Williams Park Zoo's conservation director, Lou Perrotti. And I had kind of expected this to be, you know, a bit of an environmental discussion, and it certainly was, don't get me wrong. But what's really interesting is how conservation efforts in Rhode Island really do tie into any kind of long-term plan for developing Rhode Island for the future. So that's sort of a premise that we explored unintentionally here today. When we're discussing infrastructure, education, whatever it may be, when we're looking to Rhode Island's future, it's critical to include environmental issues, certainly on a conservation basis, in that discussion and on a multitude of levels. So stand by. Coming up in a matter of moments, my conversation with the zoo's Lou Perrotti. All right, folks, we are well past back to school, Labor Day weekend, that whole deal here in southern New England. Breaking out the sweatshirts, you know the drill. Now, there's still plenty of time for some summer activities, don't get me wrong. But if you're like me, you're probably starting to think about, maybe even get excited about autumn. And when I think about autumn, one of the things that jumps out is the Jack-O-Lantern Spectacular presented by Citizens Bank. And it's back this year, October 3rd through November 3rd at Roger Williams Park Zoo. Now, what can you expect from this year's Jack-O-Lantern Spectacular? This year, guests will travel through a seasonal wonderland and celebrate the joys of New England. Visitors will feast their senses on autumn's beauty, winter's swirling snow, spring's first blossoms, and summer's ocean breezes. Summer, where we are right now, you better get out there and enjoy it. A few weeks left, because then right after it, it's autumn. And when I think of autumn, what do I think of? The Jack-O-Lantern Spectacular. Come check out thousands of intricately carved pumpkins, all displayed along the zoo's beautiful wetlands trail, complete with music and special effects. It's the 2019 Jack-O-Lantern Spectacular presented by Citizens Bank, October 3rd through November 3rd at Roger Williams Park Zoo in Providence. A great way that you can support the Bartholomewtown Podcast is to subscribe on your favorite app and also leave us a rating and review. Okay, without further ado, my conversation with Roger Williams Park Zoo's conservation director, Lou Perrotti.
No, I grew up in the state. I'm total Rhode Island native. You know, I was a kid who was fortunate enough to grow up in the woods, and you know, I was one of those kids that wasn't playing baseball and all that. You know, I was flipping stones, looking for critters, and you know, which of course formed my passion for snakes. Snakes have always been my thing. You know, and God, I was breeding boa constrictors when I was 11 years old, and had very supportive parents, and it just grew into a passion, and I just couldn't learn enough about them, learn enough about the natural history of them, and all the other amazing creatures that are in the woods. So I grew up, I guess, vicariously through National Geographic magazines, and you know, we didn't have back then all the awesome documentaries and things that we can get now on these cable networks and all that. So yeah, and you know, when I was 18, I was one of the co-founders of the Rhode Island Herpetological Association. I used to do a lot of schools and libraries, bringing in, you know, turtles and snakes into classrooms, and got pretty well known as the snake guy in the state. And then, yeah, the zoo was looking for somebody who had experience taking care of reptiles and other ectotherms. I applied for the job 20 years ago, and Was a zookeeper at first. I think 9 years of zookeeping, taking care of most of the creatures that we have in our rainforest building, and of course the reptiles and amphibians. And then I took the job as Director of Conservation Programs, is where I currently sit now.
And that's an aspect of Roger Williams Park Zoo that a lot of people don't think of when they think of the zoo. They think of the facility itself, but not necessarily the advocacy work, even some, to an extent, lobbying that goes on.
Absolutely. I mean, 2/3 of our mission is conservation and education. We make sure we're not only inspiring the next generation, but also putting our resources where their needs are, for the conservation issues that we face today, whether that's habitat restoration, restoring species through captive breeding, you name it. We try to, throw our hat in the ring for as many things as we like to have a conservation tie to every species we keep in our zoo.
In terms of a lot of people who are packaging climate change as the major challenge of our times, they refer to the conservation challenges, and in some cases they refer to it as the greatest threat to civilization or economic development, even on a micro level. So in a lot of ways, the zoo's kind of exploring ways to preserve the natural resources that we have here
under this pressure of climate change.
Right.
Exactly. While also informing our visitors and, the people that come through our programs, about climate change and what they can do to help curb, this now accelerating issue.
Yeah. And it's, there's always the thought of global warming and how the rising seas and everything. But from my anecdotally, I've noticed a change in the wilderness, in the woods, and the amount of turtles that you encounter in South County, for example. Now we're seeing shifts with bears. We're seeing potentially shifts in, obviously, definitely shifts in the ocean in terms of some of the patterns of marine life that's out there.
Oh yeah, even birds, that time their nesting and the hatching of their chicks with the hatch of a mayfly have now had their chicks hatch and find the mayflies have already hatched and there's no food for them. So we're seeing all these little nuances going on out there that it's hard for us as conservationists to plan for that, especially if we're doing species reintroductions. We have to ask ourselves now, is this habitat going to be suitable for these animals in another 50 to 75 years? So it's something that we really have to make sure we incorporate into our conservation planning to make sure we're doing right by the species that we're targeting.
Let's talk about beetles specifically. I know that's one of your passions.
It is.
A lot of people look at it as a nuisance, but I grew up near a compost earth care farm down in Charlestown. Was in my backyard, so I had a slightly different relationship with them. You know what I mean? They are a nuisance in a way if you let them.
Well, there's over 500,000 species of beetles, so I think there's more species of beetle than all other plants and animals on the planet. So there's a big diversity, and some may be nuisances in the garden, but some are also beneficial. And the species we work with, the American burying beetle, which I must mention is our official state insect, thanks to a third grade class at St. Michael's Country Day School in Newport. But this is a high-end recycler, so this is a carrion beetle that requires a vertebrate carcass of a certain size that they bury, prepare for their larvae. They show some of the highest biparental care in the insect world. So once the larvae hatch, that first instar stage, their mandibles aren't strong enough to eat on their own. So they stroke the mandibles of the adults to solicit feedings from the adults. So they actually feed them like baby birds. So their natural history and behaviors are just off the charts cool. It's federally endangered beetle. It's disappeared from 90% of its range over the last 100 years. It was listed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as endangered in 1989. So since then, there's been some efforts to captive rear them and reintroduce them to historic range. And Roger Williams Park Zoo has been working with the species since 1994. The only extant population left in the eastern portion of its range is Block Island.
Really?
Yeah, nowhere else. They used to range 35 states from the East Coast all the way just to east of the Rocky Mountains. And now you can only find them in 6 populations. So Block is the only place you can find them in the east. And then other than that, out west, they're in South Dakota, Kansas, Nebraska, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. So this thing just disappeared. So yeah, we take founder stock from Block Island, bring them to the zoo, and then we rear multiple generations of them for release onto Nantucket Island in June of every year.
So you're trying to basically build a second island population out here.
Exactly. In case, and we talk about climate change, if you talk about island populations, they're at risk. And not only from sea level rise, but from stronger storms, droughts, you name it, and this beetle, 75% of them die naturally over winter, so that 25% need to recruit. And if they're flooded out because of a big rain event, they can only take a few years of a hit like that before we could see that population starting to blink on us.
Yeah.
So fortunately, Block Island's pretty stable right now, and we've got a good population going on Nantucket presently. I'll be going out there in a couple of weeks to monitor that again. So yeah, we're happy in that we have this, insurance population out there in case we do see something stochastic happen on Block Island.
Sure. Yeah, I'm reminded of the piping plovers, as a kid, the protected areas. Obviously, that was probably much more widespread than this sounds.
And
but
still is. Yeah.
Is there are there other creatures that we should be concerned about in our own backyards here that are disappearing, that are highly protected?
We have, one state endangered amphibian, the eastern spadefoot toad. So we have in the zoos involved and partners with URI, of course, Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management. We just recently, there's only one known population in our state. So through some grants and a lot of partners, we built 2 artificial breeding sites for these guys, and in the hopes that you build them, they will come. It's very near the current existing population. But the natural history of the toad is interesting because it takes a heavy rain event, 3 to 6 inches of rain, to get these things breeding. And we haven't seen them breed in our state since 2013. But fortunately, we did see a couple of weeks ago, we had that heavy rain and thunderstorms that triggered a breeding event. So we were able to collect some tadpoles that we can rear in head start and in captivity. We're doing that at the zoo. And then we will release back to the site of origin and then hopefully increase the range of the species throughout the state.
Big time work that you're doing there.
It's great stuff. I love it. And another one I think we should be worried about is our turtles. We have some unique turtles here. You watch the news every other month. There's a confiscation of North American turtles being shipped, out of the United States, usually going overseas to Asia, either for the food markets or pet trade.
Really? So how widespread is that?
It's widespread. Yeah,
we're talking about people who are actually in the woods or in marshes in Rhode Island collecting turtles?
Collecting these things to make money to sell them overseas markets.
And is that something DEM police enforce, or who's in charge of that?
Yeah. That's usually the environmental police officers that look at that. Everything from the federal police right down to state levels. They just made a big confiscation in New York. Very, very recently, hundreds of turtles.
Okay.
And we're talking spotted turtles, eastern box turtles, wood turtles, even bog turtles, which are federally protected. So, they're ruthless. And again, these populations can only take so many hits. And a lot of the ones collected are the females going to the nesting sites. So not only are you getting an adult female, but you're getting the next generation along with her, and then completely stopping recruitment within that population. And these populations can only take so many of those hits before we really start noticing, we're not seeing these things anymore.
Yeah.
So we really need to get ahead of that. And we've been working again with DEM, monitoring some of our more sensitive species in the state, trying to get a good grip on what our population sizes are, distribution in the state. Trying to identify key nesting sites, road mortality sites, because that's another big one for most reptiles and amphibians, is because a lot of them make these migrations to either the nuptial ponds to breed in the case of amphibians, or female turtles that go nest in the same fields or the same hillsides every year are the ones that find themselves now having to traverse crossroads where cars and reptiles don't mix.
Yeah, bird and turtle trafficking. I have a painting or a drawing I made years ago have a painting of like a toucan. It's like bird trafficking, a coward's game. You know what I mean? It really is. Like,
poaching.
What a cowardly
Poaching
way to hustle.
It really is. It really is. And, even with elephants, we're seeing it. We all hear of the plight of elephants and, the ivory and, of course, rhino. But elephant poaching, it's not just the villager trying to feed his family anymore,
Right.
It's these terrorist groups now that realize they can make just as much money selling illegal animal parts, hence ivory, as opposed to, smuggling drugs or humans. And if they're caught, the penalty is basically a slap on the wrist as opposed to if they got caught smuggling humans or drugs. So what they're doing now is they're arming the poachers with more sophisticated military-grade weapons, which is making the killing more ruthless. And the last count was 96 elephants a day are being dropped for their ivory. 96 a day. So as we've done this interview, we've probably lost 3 or 4 elephants just during this interview alone, which is frightening. So Roger Williams Park Zoo is... We support a lot of in-country elephant conservation initiatives. We support the Tarangire Elephant Project, where we support a bunch of Maasai warriors that we actually arm with cell phones and bicycles. And nobody knows the bush like the Maasai. And they go out and they look, when these elephants are in the Tarangire Park, they're fairly safe. But when the droughts come and the elephants move out of the park, that's when they run into issues. And not only poaching, but, human-elephant conflict. Through agriculture raiding, raiding crops. And once an elephant becomes a habitual crop raider, they're usually shot. So what this project has done, Charles and Laura Foley, they've collared over 1,500 elephants and followed their dispersal paths and find out where they're getting into trouble. They mitigate with these landowners and farmers how to use deterrents to keep these elephants, from crop raiding, whether that be use of, hot pepper sprays. Right now, the ingenious way is they're using honeybees, which is really cool because it kind of kills 2 birds at one stone.
Right, double effect there.
Yeah, you give them the honeybees, they get the source of honey now. They got pollination for the crops. And elephants like honey too, but once they raid a beehive and get stung on the trunk, they'll never go near another one again. And just the sight of beehives turn them around. They won't go near there. So There's a great project called Bees for Elephants, which has been providing beehives to farmers in country in Africa, which is great. But then, with the poaching issues, we have the Maasai out there, the eyes of the forest for us. And if they see any illegal activity, it's called in on the cell phones, and then the armed anti-poaching units will either go out, apprehend, or in some cases, get shot. They shoot to kill. It is a ruthless business out there, and the good guys get hurt and killed as well. So it's kudos to the people in country doing that kind of work because it's an uphill battle. Yeah,
that's big time stuff. That's off the first or second blip of information that the average person's consuming for sure.
Yeah, absolutely,
and it's going on in the world.
We don't see that on the news,
right?
Yeah.
Well, we do today, at least, on Bartholomewtown Podcast.
Right on.
I want to touch on, in these last few minutes, I want to touch on your experience working with Rhode Island, but a question for you. I've asked a few people, particularly from northern Rhode Island. I've always been fascinated. Diamond Hill, rattlesnakes, yes or no?
No. There hasn't been a sighting of a timber rattlesnake, and there's going to be a million people that are going to call, he's got them in my under. No, they're not in Rhode Island. They were extirpated in the 1960s. We've been looking for them. I've been looking for them for over 45 years. Every single call that comes into me that says they see them, I follow up, I check on it. It's usually a hognose snake or a milk snake, because there are some lookalikes to the average person that I could see where they would mistake it possibly. But if you've seen a timber rattlesnake, there's no mistaking that for any other snake. It's just a very majestic snake.
Same with down in Hopkinton, Arcade, all that. There's no on the rocks there. Some people say, they nest on the rocks in the parks. No, there are no venomous snakes in the state of Rhode Island, and not even copperhead. There is even no historic record for northern copperheads in Rhode Island. Really? So that's a myth as well.
They're right over the line.
You go down to Alton and you jump in down at the westerly kind of Charlestown border there. There's no history there.
Nothing that has ever where we've actually had our hands on a specimen or a authenticated photo. Nothing.
Fascinating.
So,
That's relieving, you know?
Last one was Tiverton, Rhode Island, 1967. It was actually shot, and that was the last one that has ever been seen.
And that was a copperhead or timber rattle?
Timber rattlesnake, yep.
Yeah, in these last few minutes, your experience as you've gone around interacting with kids throughout the state and interacting with anyone throughout the state, do you find that there's a real desire to get more and more connected with the climate that we live in, the environment that we live in through animal conservation? Is that kind of a pathway for people to get closer to some kind of sense of grounding, some kind of sense of who we all are? Or is it more just purely entertaining of, wow, can I pet the sloth? That's fun.
Well, I think there's a little of both,
Yeah.
and it depends what circle you're in, and a big part of my job is trying to mentor and inspire that next generation. So, I'm often exposed to those folks. I've taught classes at the University of Rhode Island. I do lectures everywhere and as many as I can, as much as I can. And then, we live in this tech age now where, a lot of these kids are buried in the phone and, nature has nothing for them. And, those types of people, I don't know if you'll ever be able to instill that in them. But there is a great cohort of the next generation in our state, and I'm proud to say I work alongside a lot of them. A lot of them I watched grow up through our zoo camps. I see them in URI in their classes when I go and talk. I said, I remember you when you were in zoo camp, And then now some of these are our state and federal biologists that are working in the state now, which is fantastic to see that transition of these kids that were running around our zoo in pink shirts in our camp are now the ones writing our permits, which is really neat to see. So, yeah, and I think Rhode Island, we're very lucky. We have a state that really cares about our environments, our open space, our bay, our oceans, and I'm proud to say that we have a lot of support from, Department of Environmental Management, all the universities. I'm also on the board of the Rhode Island Natural History Survey, who does a great job of connecting people to nature and connecting them with the information they need to make sure that we're safeguarding this stuff into the future and making sure we're going to leave this planet to the next generation as good, if not a little better than it was left to us. So, it's nice to live in a state that is priority and has been. And
yeah, I agree. It's part of the identity. It's part of the history going all the way back. When I've been the last really I've always tried to look to the indigenous timeline instead of the Western timeline of thinking, all right, Rhode Island started in 1640 or whatever, thinking, no, it's
way
thousands of years old.
Yes,
I was standing in front of the tower in Newport, that mysterious solarium, and just thinking, they could be way off in when this thing was built by hundreds of years. There's no reason to think that our current civilization and version of it is, the beginning of Rhode Island. I think it goes way back
absolutely. To the Narragansett Indians.
The Narragansetts and Mashpee and hey, even before that, some of these creatures that we're trying to protect.
And nobody lived in harmony more with nature than the Native Americans,
Right.
So we can learn a lot from Native American culture, that's for sure.
No question.
And even our zoo, if you look at our zoo, we're the third oldest zoo in the country, so we've been inspiring for many, 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 many generations. And, the zoo's been a wonderful place for people to come, not only have a good time with the family, but what they don't know too is every time they pay an admission or come through our gate or buy a membership, they're helping conserve those elephants in Africa. They're helping me rear some of the most endangered amphibians in South America. They're helping with these turtle surveys, keeping the American burying beetle on the planet. The New England cottontail rabbit, our only native cottontail. Our zoo has been breeding those now since 2010. We now have created populations in New Hampshire, Maine. We're actually putting this thing back where it had been extirpated from many, many years ago due to hunting and habitat loss. And the rabbit also, the project has sparked a lot of habitat restoration. So you're seeing a lot of this early successional habitat restoration going on around the state, which not only benefits cottontail rabbit, but it benefits other species like woodcocks, eastern box turtles, black racers, partridge, grouse, a lot of these ground nesting birds that we're not seeing anymore because of the loss of this habitat. So, it's a synergy of things that, are going on here that most people that come through the gate that are supporting through, coming to our zoo don't realize that they're supporting. So we appreciate you helping us get that word out there.
Yeah, my pleasure. With so much discussion on education, infrastructure, intangibles right now when you look to Rhode Island's future. And admittedly, even I put climate, environment, it's not on the top of the list of things. If someone said, what do we need to do for in terms of 25 years? But the reality is the work you're doing, chipping away at it, is fundamental to everything. And none of it is going to stay for very long if we don't continue to chip away at the environment. It's just a fact.
Yeah, I mean, the old saying, the worst thing we can do is nothing.
Right.
Even if it's one beetle at a time, we're out there doing it. So, and proud to say we're a leader in it. For a small zoo, we're pretty well known for our conservation and education programs, not only throughout the AZA, but internationally as well.
That's all the time we have for today, but I'll be back on Friday with a brand new episode. And there's over 100 episodes of Bartholomewtown on your favorite app, ripodcast.com and bartholomewtown.com. Hope you enjoyed today's program. Until next time, I'm Bill Bartholomew, and we'll talk soon.
At HealthSource RI for Employers, we provide access to health insurance to more than 1,100 local businesses and nonprofits, and 96% of them renew through us every year. Maybe it's our choice of 19 different health plans, our 10 years of customizing solutions, or our one local team of dedicated experts helping employers find quality health insurance. See how our numbers stack up for you. Learn more at healthsourceri.com/employers.